Today we are learning about the pluperfect tense, which will be the fourth tense and final tense we are learning this year. The first three were the present, imperfect, and perfect tenses. There are, however, 6 total tenses in Latin. The present tense, which happens now, the action happens right now. The imperfect tense, where the action happened in the past but is incomplete, or it was a continuous action. The perfect tense is also a past tense, but that action was completed action or action that took place only at one time. And now we have the pluperfect tense, which is also a past tense. But this is sometimes referred to in English as the prior past. And this is action that happened before or prior to another action in the past. And it's actually the easiest to translate because there's only one way to translate it. And then you have the future and the future perfect, which we will get to in a later way down the road, not today. If you graphically think of the tenses, so whatever you're talking about right now, today, that's present tense. Something that hasn't happened yet is future, so down the line. And then you have the 3 other tenses: perfect, imperfect, and pluperfect. Imperfect is the box because it stretches over time. It was not complete. Perfect is one moment in time in the past. And then pluperfect happened before those. So just a little graphic reminder. Do notice I didn't put the future perfect on there because that is both a past and future, which we don't need to get into. So for most of our verbs now, there are 4 principal parts, but we have really only learned the first 3 principal parts. And those are, so if you were to look in your vocabulary list or your glossary, when they give you the verb, they give you these 3 principal parts. They're the building blocks from which we can build everything else, all the other tenses. So porto, portare, those 2 parts would help us with the present stem, which we use to build the present tense, the imperfect tense, and the future tense. You would just take off the RE, and you're left with porta, and that's the present stem. The portavi, we take off the I, we're left with the perfect stem, which is used to form the perfect, pluperfect, and future perfect tenses. So 2 stems: porta, portava. And most verbs would form that in a similar way. Take off the RE and then take off the I. So once you know which stem you use, you then have to have an ending, because the ending reflects the subject. So every verb will have an ending because it has to tell you the subject. First person, I and we, is the subject. Second person, you all, is the subject. Third person, he, she, it, they. And then you have to distinguish, is it singular or plural? Now these endings, as we know, repeat. They might change slightly, but they repeat. There's a pattern to them. So these are the very These endings you would see in the present imperfect and future tenses, along with the present stem, and then for each different tense you'd have to do something else. Do notice that the first person, you can have O or M as an ending there. Now, the perfect tense endings, you might look at it and say, well, I thought you said that they repeat. Well, they do, there is a repetition, but it's not as obvious. You can see the T on the third person singular, it. You can see the NT on the third person plural, erunt. And then you see the MUS and the TIS. So the first person singular, the second person singular are a little bit different. That's where it varies from the present tense, imperfect, and future tense endings. And now your pluperfect. You might be saying, again, it's changed, but it's changed, but the pattern is still there. M, S, T. MUS, TIS, NT. Now, also, if you are paying very close attention to these pluperfect endings, you will notice that you have seen these before, but you have seen these endings as a verb, as the imperfect of the verb to be. So if I just saw eram not as an ending, that would mean I was. The Romans recycled it, the form, and turned it into the ending of the pluperfect tense. And like I said, we see the repetition here, MST, MUS, TIS, NT. Just a slight variation on it. So the present tense, you would take that present stem, porta, add one of the endings we just discussed. That's your verb. And present tense, we know, happens right now. The slave girl carries the food into the dining room. Or you could say is carrying the food into the dining room. Now the imperfect tense, we had to do something to it to be able to tell it apart from the present tense. So we added BA. We slipped in BA. So ancala cubum intraclinium portabat, bat. And that now all of a sudden that makes it past tense, a past imperfect. So something that happened in the past that wasn't completed or was ongoing. But all just used was. The slave girl was carrying food into the dining room. When future tense, we're not going to even deal with that, comes much later. Perfect tense. We use that perfect stem. We talked about way, the third principal part, minus I, and that leaves you with portawa. We sometimes call this the V-suck stem because there's the pattern that the stem itself ends with V, S, U, or X. That doesn't always happen, but it does often happen that the stem would end in one of those letters, like it does here. It changes from, it's different from the present stem. The stem itself is different. Whereas from porta, from the present and the imperfect, portat, portabat, the stem was the same. To go down to the perfect tense, I've changed the stem using that third principal part. And then you just add those endings we talked about earlier too. So ancla canem in vilam portavit. The slave girl carried a dog into the house. Completed action. And now finally to the pluperfect tense. This tense is very easy. It's easy to recognize. It's easy to translate. It's just a weird name, pluperfect, which actually comes from plusquam perfectum, which means more than perfect, or prior. We call it the prior past. So something that happened before perfect or imperfect. It's an action that happened prior to another action. So you just use this, that in English you use the helping verb had, H-A-D, had. Canis, quem ancula in villam portaverat, and you see that ERA there, easily identifies portaverat as in pluperfect tense. Felem agitavit. So the main verb is agitavit. The dog chased the cat. Well, then portaverat is an action that happened prior to the chasing. The dog, which the slave girl had carried into the house, chased the cat.